Welcome to the University of Uppsala, Sweden, where we are pleased to be hosting the seminar series, The Prospects of Criticism, part of our joint research project with the University of Louisville, Kentucky, funded by the Templeton Religion Trust as part of the Art Seeking Understanding program. In this seminar, recorded on the 1st of December 2022, Professor Anna Foka, Director of Digital Humanities at the University of Uppsala, talks about her work in applying advanced computational techniques to the field of cultural heritage and the study of antiquity. In connection with her ongoing project, Quantifying Culture, a study of AI and cultural heritage collections, Professor Foka discusses the possibilities and problems in using artificial intelligence and machine learning to help in classifying and conserving cultural history and its artifacts. There we are. Welcome everybody to the final seminar meeting of the autumn term. We'll be circulating details of the really exciting range of speakers we have coming up next term in due course. But now it's the 1st of December, and it's a huge pleasure to welcome Anna Foka to join us. Anna is Director of the Center of Digital Humanities here in Uppsala, and she's a member of our research network precisely in virtue of the fact that she has successfully conducted and is also engaged on many research projects in the history of art and the history of the humanities, incorporating advanced computational techniques with humanities learning. So she's been involved in the distant learning idea and is currently engaged in two fascinating sounding projects. One is funded by the Wallenberg Foundation and it's called Quantifying Culture and the study of artificial intelligence and cultural heritage collections. And another one is the Swedish Research Council funded project Digital Periegesis, which is an amazing idea of basically making a digital all bells and whistles version of Pausanias's description of Greece, which is basically a 2nd century, very comprehensive tourist guide from 2nd century Greece. And I think it's going to be as equally relevant for the citizens of the 2nd century ancient world as it will be for the citizens of the 21st century modern world. And we look very much forward to hearing about some of these projects and about Anna's ideas, because it's going to be really, really useful for those of us in the project engaged on try to bring this forward. But without further ado, I would like to introduce Anna and hear your presentation. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. I'm really grateful to be here today, and I'm really grateful that you've invited me to speak about this. And I wanted to say that I will talk today about one of the projects, which is basically quantifying culture, but also some observations I made on the way to it. And that I thought that I didn't know what the audience would be like. I know that you have this incredible project, and I knew a few things about John, but I didn't know how many people would be and what kind of questions they might have, or maybe if they will understand. And sometimes when we work in digital humanities, we use quite a bit of jargon, and I thought it might be a good idea that I begin with sort of discussing exactly what we actually do. So if I was to give a little summary of what I will do today, I will talk a little bit about the what of artificial intelligence and heritage, and focus a little bit on terminology and key terms that we use throughout this, because I think it's very important. For me as a core humanist, I should say that I have a background in classical studies and classical philology and archaeology myself, and ancient history, but also a degree in media studies from before. And I do come from a traditional humanities background myself, and somehow I entered the dark path of digital technology. And sometimes when I talk to my peers, it's good to sort of give an analysis of what exactly I'm talking about. I mean, generally speaking, we tend to use all these AI, ML, NLP sort of acronyms, but it's good to sort of know what this is all about when we talk. And if I go too fast, or if there's something that is unclear, please feel free to make a note or raise your hands and ask me if you like, whichever way works best. As I tell my students, we don't we don't float here. Everybody swims. So I really hope that everybody swims today. And essentially, I wanted to say that I put this sort of picture in the in this slide because I thought it's a little bit of what I do. I'm interested in the past and I'm interested in memory artifacts, but I want to use contemporary tools to think of them forwards in the future and what are the possibilities with them. And that brings us into the how and why of artificial intelligence and what are the sort of project methods and impact and how do I work with this. And I will bring up two projects that I direct at the moment. One is the Quantifying Culture project, and the other one is a short project called Marginalia Machine Learning. And why am I doing these things? But also I will bring up a couple of questions in the process of number two, which is how and why AI. I will also sort of round up with a couple of observations I've made about image synthesis and the agency or no agency, but as well as aesthetics that artificial intelligence platforms and applications have, and how I put a big question mark on artificial question mark intelligence, again question mark, and is it really some sort of post-human thing, or it's just humans making mistakes again? Because I want to sort of argue for that a little bit. And when I talk about sort of artificial intelligence and sort of heritage collections, the first one is that when I talk about heritage collections, I sort of talk about image, and I talk about text, and I talk about artifacts, and I talk about things that concern the past and memory institutions, collections that come from the distant future or the very long future, or the very close future, or the very close, distant past, future, back, long past, or more contemporary, so to say. But also sort of I'm interested not so much in digitization, which is digitizing old artifacts and text and pictures, but mostly in digitalization, which is what happens afterwards. And that's where sort of artificial intelligence comes into the picture. And I will sort of explain what I say when I actually talk about artificial intelligence. It's not this annoying picture you see on your screens right now. We're not talking about robots exactly. So what does artificial intelligence and all these methods have to do with collections? Well, contemporary scholarship says that concerning digitalization, expectations are placed high on new technologies, such as artificial intelligence, more precisely machine learning technologies that are only just beginning to be explored by museums and heritage institutions. And I would add here, because I think it's of bigger importance to your project, art galleries. And there are different things that we do. And when we talk about artificial question mark intelligence question mark, this is, of course, the doings of human beings. And that is something that we need to really take into consideration. This is not some machine sort of coming up and telling us what to do. It's not some sort of future scenario of synthetics like in Star Trek. It's not some sort of weird sci-fi situation, but it's basically the very concrete construction of intelligent entities, where intelligence is further defined as rational action or best possible action. So, for example, if you're typing into your Google search something, then it might sort of autocorrect something, or it might also sort of make a suggestion that we call those recommender systems. That is a form of artificial question mark intelligence question mark. And another point which Kate Crawford in her recent book has put forward is that artificial intelligence systems are not autonomous, they're not rational, they're not robots, they're not Westworld, so to say, or able to discern anything without extensive computationally intensive training with large data sets or predefined rules and rewards. In fact, artificial intelligence, as we know it, depends entirely on a much wider set of political and social structures. So they exist somewhere. Somewhere is programming those models. Someone is programming algorithms that make decisions. Someone puts their bias into those models, and they can do some things, but they cannot do everything yet, because we haven't trained everything on everything, so to say. It's a very logical sort of understanding of it. And another question is that they take a lot of resources, they take a lot of knowledge, and they take sort of financial means to be materialized. So it's not like, okay, it's trendy, let's use artificial intelligence to do this and that. It's not that simple. It's never that simple. But back to heritage collections, what kind of methods we use to this day, it's dependent basically on what kind of collection types we have and what kind of collection formats we have. So for example, if we have a handwritten text, it's very different what kind of digital technology we can use on it than actually having a picture or a painting. And what can we actually do with them depends precisely on what is at stake. And normally I want to be because I mean that for reasons of economy, and because I don't want to take 3 days to analyze that, but I will focus on two particular things today. And one of them is computer vision, which what I research is automatic classification and enrichment of collections, sort of finding a picture of an indigenous group of people and being able to classify it as such, right? But also to perhaps improve data quality that we have, sort of correcting things, adding colors, these kinds of things. But that is like one example. And a good example of this is, for example, the National Gallery of Denmark. I have my notes here. The National Gallery of Denmark has a very interesting project where they have used off-the-shelf software to categorize every single work in the online collection containing approximately 40,000 digitized works. And this has enabled online visitors to search for works in new ways, such as by motifs, for example, such as people, flowers, or chairs, or searching for works done in specific color schemes, or for works that resemble each other. So that is an example of what sort of computer vision can do for us. And then there are, of course, complexities there. For example, one big problem that we have when we use computer vision for automatic classification or for enriching artifacts or digitized artifacts with information is that we have a cross-depiction problem. So, for example, photographs are very easy to categorize and classify right now for algorithms. But when it comes to sort of paintings, you have other problems there. So, for example, detecting objects in photographic images in recent years works, but algorithms still struggle to recognize objects in non-photographic depiction styles, such as paintings and drawings or sculptures, for example. And this is sometimes referred to as the cross-depiction problem. And this remains a significant obstacle for the use of image recognition in art collections. Up to at least 2017, 2018, when research has been conducted on it. And an interesting attempt to circumvent this problem has been presented by the Brighton Museum in the UK, which has experimented with using off-the-shelf software to offer suggestions for metadata, so for enriching collections with words, so they are searchable in return, as a provocation to inspire human curators to include keywords that they otherwise might have not thought of. And of course, an additional problem that we have with every type of collection is the ethical challenges when we use computer vision. So, for example, racial and gender bias is also a problem. And if you use any off-the-shelf software solutions, you can find sort of promising results. You have an error rate of 4% in 2016 that we know of, which is more or less what humans have a problem with. But there are bias relating to sort of Western approaches to culture and sensitive topics such as colonialism. An example could be, that's not a colonialism example, but it's a sort of safe example I could bring up right now that comes from the top of my head. Let's say you have a child in a kilt, might be recognized as a girl, or a child with longer hair may be recognized as a girl. If you have a central training database, such as the ImageNet, for example, there are these problems. And you can have also problematic classifications because, for example, ImageNet is trained a long time ago. So using the word debtor or snob are words that we don't really use right now, but the system might be using them anyways. The other method, which I will sort of focus a little bit in relation to aesthetics today, and I'm already 15 minutes in, but I think this will take altogether about 30 minutes, and I think I was really sort of okay with between 20 to 45. So I think that sort of leaves us some time to discuss, because I think that's the most interesting part, not me talking necessarily, but what you think about this is sort of using natural language processing, and natural language processing is basically the intersection of linguistics and computer science. And it's used to analyze and process large amounts of human languages. And then you have additional methods, for example, optical character recognition, OCR, which is recognizing printed words, or HTR, which is handwritten text recognition, which can recognize handwritten text and transcribe it easier for us. I mean, instead of having a paleographer, in theory, you could have a paleographer training a model, and then you have this, and that is, it's not really meant to replace humans, but to work with humans in that sense. And it's also the ability of machine to understand and to generate speech, and to bridge between human communication and computer understanding. And that's what people call it these days. And this is you should know that NLP is something that has exploded in the last decade. It created new interdisciplinary avenues, and the growing number of digitized text makes it possible to sort of work with these things. But in both cases, when it comes to manuscripts, sometimes you have idiosyncratic manuscripts that are stained, erased, they have, the wrong spelling. Uppsala, for example, shows up in a lot of documents from the 16th century as Uppfala. It's very difficult to recognize if you have a system that is trained to recognize Uppsala, but these days it's getting better and better. Or you may have unusual and unrecognizable handwriting. For example, as a joke now, but my handwriting would not be recognized by anyone because it's just like scribbles, for example. And I know a lot of people who write in a very idiosyncratic way, and it's hard to recognize if it's very specific and weird. And I have some scholarship to accompany these comments. Printed documents may have digital noise. So, for example, if you have an old newspaper and you want to sort of figure out what is in that picture or what is in the text, it might sort of have the colors may leak, the ink may link. So you don't have the possibility. But also, most importantly, what NLP can do for us is to sort of create chatbots. So you can actually bring people back to life in some way, and I think I will bring an example in a bit about it. You could bring Salvador Dali, for example. That's one good example. But also recently there has been the infinite conversation between two philosophers, which I will play for you later, where they've trained chatbots to discuss and talk as if there were these people, and it's an infinite conversation that never ends. It's very interesting. So within my project, this is some of the things that we've been looking for. One is, what is the current and evolving state of the art of cultural heritage institution digitization in Sweden today? And it's a project that is financed until 2025, and we work with World Cultural Museum collections and the National Archives of Sweden collections, but also with our own collections here at Gustavianum. And it's very difficult to say so much about it. We've published some, and I will get into this, but we can say, generally speaking, that it is in its nascent state, even in Sweden, using automation to improve data quality and findability and interoperability between collections. Another question is, how can we have more nuanced and meaningful generated descriptions on heritage collections that comply with fair and international data standards? And how can issues of qualitative nature, which is bias, diversity, and ethics, be connected to the quantitative nature of artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms? And in this, we have observed some things which connect to aesthetics and sort of like how we program algorithms. So we are publishing with already, and there are some forthcoming items that I would like to share with you at a later stage. But basically, we've been working on AI and heritage uses, which is a few of the things that I've presented before. So how do we use artificial intelligence and machine learning for heritage? How do we use artificial intelligence and machine learning for classification? Can we actually classify? And you can see the picture of this Papuan woman. When we use standard off-the-shelf classification algorithms, she classifies as a bird or an animal. because she has this face painting that our algorithms cannot sort of pick. And when we have Sami collections, it's not only the algorithms. Sami is the indigenous populations of northern Scandinavia and Finland, and we have a lot of collections, and it's very difficult to tell gender, for example, because it's based on color schemes that the indigenous populations wear, and there's a variety and a diversity depending on where they come from. And we had to call in a Sami expert and a member of the community to help us identify those. But the problem that we had there was that all the photographic collections were black and white. So we couldn't actually work with this collection so much. So these are some of the examples that we saw. But basically, it's not what you see is what you get, is what the person that has programmed sees is what you get. But the impact of this, and also the implementation, which is again at its nascent state, and we try to support this, because when people use automation, when cultural heritage professionals use automation, they simply cannot, they cannot program themselves, most of them. I mean, they're curators. But this kind of knowledge, this sort of machine learning or artificial intelligence methods and deep sort of computer vision, they may not be experts in the sector. So they have to normally buy that service from somewhere else. And there needs to be a better dialogue, basically. And what we think would be the impact of our work is to sort of support data quality improvement in collections in Sweden, to sort of bring up this diversity and inclusion, but with participation. So bringing in these members of those communities whose collections are being in Sweden, and sort of help them participate in automating the classification of these collections, but also with the support of reaching future audiences and making this available and possible for the future audiences, but also sort of advocate for the expertise and training across cultural heritage institutions, which we all need, I think. Even as academics, we need to learn more things about technology if we are to use it. And in the second project, which is the Marginalia and Machine Learning project, and that's in collaboration with Durham University, and it's a short project. We work with Linnaeus and Copernicus libraries here at Carolina Rediviva, which is our beautiful library. And what we do is we try to sort of implement handwritten text recognition to make those marginalia, the little interlinear or marginal writing or interfoliated editions, searchable. And we try to separate handwritten and printed text, and we try to sort of create and train optical character recognition models in different languages to make those marginalia searchable. And we think that this will not only sort of support data quality improvement, but also it sort of helps support those who want to research those people and their libraries and how they read those books. It's really fascinating, and we only have 1 year, and we're planning to apply for more for this kind of work. But then in this sort of journey of trying to figure out artificial intelligence and how we work with collections, I sort of got into the loop of the reverse work, image synthesis. And for those of you, is anybody in the audience aware of image synthesis? I can't see all of you. But image synthesis is basically using NLP, using natural language processing, sort of writing a script and producing an image. And you can use a lot of platforms to do that. So the way you describe things will yield results, but those results might not be what you expect. And I have a little bit of a success story here in terms of aesthetics. And that is not mine, but Lev Manovich's. And I would like to say that he's actually publishing a book about this in a year. I bumped into this work, and I thought this is something that I really need to present as a success story. It's not my success story in any case. We'll get into my experiments later and how aesthetics work. But so Lev Manovich basically used one of those image synthesis applications, platforms, one called Mid-Journey, in different versions to recreate his experience of USSR. He migrated with his family from USSR to the United States in 1981, and he wanted to create pictures, historical pictures that look like his classmates or his class experience, to have some memory of that. And he used, you see that this picture is not very good. It looks a little bit crooked. And I think it's an older version of Midjourney, but the current version of Midjourney is what he came up with. And I had to ask for his permission to do this. He calls this synthetic classicism. And what he asked for 2 Russian high school students and 3 Russian high school students. And that's what Midjourney came up with. And he said he was very satisfied with these results. And his words are, he generated these images with Midjourney 4, and he did not do any editing. And he says that version 4 of Midjourney significantly increased realism and coherence of images, and at the same time it often generated more idealized stereotypical commercial visuals. For example, he used the same prompt so he wrote the instructions he gave to the platform was Russian high school students in year, and he used some 70s, I think mid-70s. And the figures of images indeed looked like his classmates in Moscow, he says. And these are not real people. These are just sort of perfect-looking models that were generated. And I think they're dressed sometimes in historical clothing, which evoke much earlier decades than the 19th century. So this is where the NLP algorithm was sort of like unfaithful, so to say, or not followed through. So if you make something unique today, because they changed this, he prompts people, you may not be there tomorrow. And then we here at the lab, we have stable diffusion. And if you, I'm welcoming you if you come to visit us to use it. And what it does, it's dreaming. That's what the process is. When you give it words to create a perfect image, it is dreaming that perfect image for you. And then it comes up with ideas, and it takes a lot of time. But I used an out-of-the-shelf other application that is actually, you can log in and create an account for free, and you can have about 115 pictures, which is a new AI system that can create realistic images and art from a description in natural language. And not only it can do this, it can create realistic images. That is the debatable part in terms of aesthetics, and I will get into this. But it can also complete things that you give it. So I made this experiment where I took my mugshot and it completed it with a theme horror. I'm not entirely sure where I see horror there, perhaps in the how it sort of altered my jacket, but I thought it was very interesting that it gave sort of this murky sort of Scandinavian background, which already was there. So I'm not entirely sure, because this is outside our campus, how it sort of calculated this horror image. But then I thought, okay, well, maybe I should try something I know better, not just have as a subject myself. So what I put there is statue of a handsome man wrestling a lion. And as you can see, apart from one very photographic picture of a man who is digitally enhanced, we also have very classical marble statues. So then I thought, okay, well, how far can this go? If, let's say, I say sculpture of Hercules wrestling a lion, right? And then you see again that this is pictures of in marble. None of them is really, I mean, yeah, you could say it is a little bit classical, which makes sense if you use Hercules, the word Hercules. It may also be able to calculate that Hercules wrestling a lion is a Roman depiction, not Heracles. So maybe it's not bronze for that. Then I tried to create a bronze statue of Hercules wrestling a lion. This was also quite interesting because the proportions were very different to what I would call sort of a classical statue. And then it continues, and it generated sort of nonstop these images, which I pointed out. And then I thought, okay, in terms of aesthetics, does it actually understand classical art? Should I try and do something else? So I asked for a Kouros sculpture. Are you aware of what is a Kouros? A Kouros is a statue of a man. There are different styles and different sort of ontologies where we can talk about the Kouros, but generally speaking, is a statue of a young man that is naked, and it's meant to be at its perfect depiction of Apollo, the god Apollo, and it's normally has one leg going forward, and there are different styles. So there is archaic Kouros, and there is the equivalent is the Kore, who is a girl statue which is dressed and is meant to be a depiction of a young girl like Artemis. But when I asked for a Kouros statue, I got girls, and I also got a horse. Again, a classical theme, but not really sort of closer to any classical art I know, and certainly not a man. So I thought that was very interesting. Then I asked for a Kore sculpture, and I got really weird sculptures that did not sort of correspond to a Kore statue. I thought that was also interesting. So whoever programmed DALL-E did not do classical art at school. When I asked a broad statue of a beautiful woman, I got some sort of reference to neoclassicism in the third picture. But then I thought also, how do they measure a beautiful woman? I mean, that is a person that we can say for certain has long hair and is slim. I thought that was also very interesting in terms of how it measured the word beautiful. And then I think that was a picture of a Kouros, of an archaic Kouros, if I remember well. And I thought that also this did not correspond. I mean, there is again 2 women there. Doesn't really correspond to what I asked it to do. A Greek, and then I said, okay, maybe if I say a Greek Kore sculpture. Again, this is a bust. This is not a sculpture. And the third picture could very well be Roman, depending on the style, because it's very expressive. And then I said an archaic Kore sculpture, which is a standard style and it has a standard aesthetic. And again, it came up with something completely different. So I think I will stop here. It's about a little bit over 30 minutes. But I thought what was interesting, if I was to conclude this sort of image synthesis idea, is that, yes, there's no artificial and there's no intelligence there. It's just what a human person tries to do. And sometimes the machine is not cannot understand the idiosyncrasies of language in a way that is sort of informed as an expert would, at least with DALL-E. And I should say, I also tried Midjourney before, but it comes out a little bit kitsch and a little bit too photorealistic. So I don't think that is sort of, I didn't want to include those examples here. But as an experiment, I thought it was interesting to see that, both in what we do with AI, but also how we can reverse and harness this power. And what does this mean about our understanding and aesthetics? And how aesthetics, language of aesthetics can be translated into this. That's it from me.
Thanks so much, Anna. That was absolutely fascinating and slightly mind-blowing. I wonder whether we should get rid of the slideshow so we can all see each other. I can see there's some applause, and I think there will be some questions too. But it strikes me this issue just mentioned that whoever it was that programmed DALL-E had an insufficient classical art education, which seems reasonable. So presumably, if somebody after the fact or added to DALL-E or a different system, they just added, let's say, a glossary of artistic terms from any period or culture. We have very, very specific stylistic and material attributes in the way when you mention a particular style, it means that it has to be this kind of thing. It can't be that kind of thing. That could just simply be plugged in, and those kind of vagaries would be solved, presumably.
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, I guess I'm not entirely sure. I mean, I see that Martin Steinhagen has put an example, which I think is very interesting. And that is Michel Foucault dancing in costume in front of the Carolina Rediviva Library in Uppsala I don't know if you can see it on the. I think it's really funny, and maybe I will copy this and print it and use it in my office because I think it's fun. But I wanted to say that yes, presumably, but I'm not entirely sure. But my guess is that it would be very interesting. I wanted to bring an example that I was shown by someone, which also has to do with precisely this. Sort of programming something to do exactly what you ask it to do. And I hope it's okay that I play audio here.
You might need to share your audio.
Yeah, so wait.
Don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that you should cheat on your partner and so on. What I'm saying is that this absolute unconditional love is an illusion, a kind of sublime illusion. But it can have positive consequences. If you have this illusion, then you are ready to make any sacrifice.
So if you could, I don't know if you can hear me again, but as of late 2022 says it is cheap and easy to produce AI-generated content that is superficially good and surprisingly similar to the real thing. So what they're trying to do is they have sort of Bavarian director Werner Herzog and Slovenian philosopher Zizek can guide us while navigating this treacherous water. So what they did was they actually built an infinite conversation between those two people. So I guess everything is possible. The question is, what are you planning to do with it, I suppose?
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, that was amazing. Right, Martin, we have a question from you. Anyone else?
Yes.
Please feel free to raise your digital hands or write something in the chat. It's fine too.
Thank you, Anna. This is really lovely. And go ahead and print the Foucault. I think this DALL-E is great fun to experiment with. I'm wondering how we should use this in science or humanities, but in the universities, because there seems to be an ever expanding gap between the alleged experts, art historians or philosophers, and the technology that they use, because I've got the feeling that so many people who want to use the technology really haven't a clue how it works. They wouldn't be able to code this from scratch at all. Maybe no one would be. So to what extent is that a sort of safe scientific practice to be using quite sophisticated machinery and technology that you ultimately don't really understand? So you're really at the mercy of what's being spat back at you.
I think I can talk about the heritage institutions and what they have been using basically, and I can say that there needs to be a dialogue between developers and experts, constant dialogue. And I think a good way of working with these things is it is and it isn't crowdsourcing sort of information. When you don't have any experts, maybe you can crowdsource it and sort of prompt the audience to do these things. I think I found out that in Sweden, the majority of heritage organizations or institutions, they use things that they buy, and most notably they use recommender systems, which is something that is used for commercial use. I mean, Google Arts and Culture is a commercial system of the kind. So if you actually get into, say, the World Culture Museum's page and type and want to look at the picture that you find interesting and click on it, then it will get back to you and say, hey, I see you have an eye for detail. Would you be interested in this? So it's the same things, it's the same sort of technology that we have for ads on social media. Or so I would say to be on the safe side, there has to be a dialogue. And the biggest problem is that there's not enough dialogue between experts of humanities subjects and people that work with technology. And I really hope that this is an occasion, because I think deep fakes like what I just showed you now, or maybe had you hearing, they can be really dangerous. I mean, I don't know. You can have Putin dancing outside of Carolina Rediviva. That would be problematic, and people might believe that he's actually there, or someone,
Yeah. Or think about student dissertations.
I mean,
really
I mean, there are AI generated texts, and I think there's a group at Uppsala University. I think it's the Department of Education, which is studying application writing algorithms.
Yeah.
And it looked really, really. Research writing. So you can actually write a whole article using algorithms. And if you don't know the subject, it looks very convincing because it actually uses citations and things from that it picks from the right places.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're very scary.
Yeah. So would you say that maybe this should just become, is this your opinion? Should this become a standard part of any undergraduate degree in the humanities? That you get at least a couple of courses or maybe one course on how to navigate artificial intelligence and machine learning?
We teach a PhD course in cultural analytics here, and we are just starting a Python course for humanities. And that's a national initiative. So we work together with Lund and with Umeå University on this one. And we think that this is important, that sort of our students get to know that. But naturally, we're focusing on archives, library information, science, museum, and cultural heritage studies, because this is the department that we do that. I know that computational linguists, I was actually talking to them today, have quite a lot of machine learning courses and that they work with. And that's pretty cool, like, I believe, because that's like, they're computational linguists. I mean, they have other ways of using language and much more expertise than we do in different ways. So they are any natural language processing expert. And we do have short workshops on natural language processing, but it's not our expertise, so to say. So we focus naturally on machine learning for automatic subject classification, libraries, galleries, museums. So I say our master students and our PhD students learn a little bit of that these days.
That's good. Thank you.
Thanks very much, both of you. Eileen, we have a question.
Thank you. And I apologize, I came in a little late, but it was really interesting, everything you were talking about. So this last process you were describing, where a verbal description generates an image, and then you would look at the image and think, yes, no, you'd get some kind of mixed reaction. It reminded me of what it's like to see a film adaptation of a novel that one knows really well. And I wondered if it would even be possible, I mean, I guess it's not quite the same, but to take a description from a novel and a film that has really attended to that description, that has tried to realize it, and then also plug that language into one of these systems and see, I don't know, just compare it. And I don't know if possibly there could be some aesthetically interesting difference that goes on, like how the director or the set designers or whatever who made the film realized
that is such an excellent I think this I have to sort of like make a note of this, because I think that is a really excellent comment. Thank you for this.
Well, I would be, but one thing it made me wonder about had to do with your the photo of yourself and and that you were interested in like how it came up with the background, and that does seem quite variable in like these film adaptations. One of the things they're doing is sort of filling out the extra. The novel will never say exactly what fills a visual scene. And anyway, so I just think it's just seemed interesting to me. Like, how do people fill it in? How do these systems fill it in? So
yeah, I'm just thinking of Isaac Asimov's Foundation, which we've been watching recently on, and how sort of it's very different to the books. And I think that sort of these days, Hollywood filmmakers, at least since the 90s, I would argue, have this like sort of checklist. How do we fill the information so we get more audiences, right? I don't know if machine learning, image synthesis is there yet. Because I don't think it's an excellent comment, because this is exactly what it is. We go from one to the other, and there's a filter process from another human, and that's exactly, or many other humans, and that's exactly what it is. It's a very good sort of parallel, I think. But I would say that when it comes to Hollywood and sort of films and depending, of course, on the country and everything, these days we have sort of checklist. Does it have enough diversity? Does it have enough women in leading roles? Does it have? And I think that's very interesting, because I don't think that's the case necessarily with DALL-E. For example, the interpretation of beautiful, right? It was a skinny person with long hair, a slim person with long hair. That's not necessarily our interpretation of beautiful right now. But I guess it's the same process. It's like a lot of people review this and then they come up with something automatically. So it's a really good parallel and to describe the process, I would say. I would have never thought it myself. Thank you for that.
So one of the things you mentioned is in particular in connection with the second project, digitalizing cultural heritage, that there's a documentation and an access function, but there's also, I suppose, something that comes with it, often smuggled in the back door, which is a preservation thing. So that it just is the case that things that have been successfully digitized, often the original things themselves become slightly disposable. So we know that with books. So the fact that we can search and get freely available out of copyright books and many copyrighted books just simply makes physical books much less valuable, despite the fact that many of us have books in our backgrounds as some kind of weird attribute, but nonetheless. And I wondered, to what extent is this documentation, how is it future-proof? Because it's going to become incredibly important. And I think we all know, those of us who take far too many photographs of their children, the fact that it was kind of much easier in the old days because the photographs were just there and we'd know where to find them. Whereas now, whenever my computer gets updated, I suddenly worry that I've lost all my photographs because I just can't get them anymore.
Do you have an external hard drive? I would definitely buy an external hard drive to save yourself the headache. Yeah, I have one here too.
But even with that, it just everything becomes less, less tangible. And we all know that, like, if we have a floppy disk in our office with a great manuscript we produced in 1997,
I have one.
We, like, how do you get the stuff off it? And so there's, I don't know, there is this interesting problem with digitization and the assumption that digital entities will last forever.
No,
but they don't.
They don't. I mean, we forget things, we erase things, things sort of break down. Is in the same way. But I mean, there is an incentive in Europe, at least, and also in S&D, which is the Swedish data and Swedish National Data Service. S&D is there, which is about making things findable, fair, and FAIR is an acronym, and it stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And this is when we digitize, we try to sort of follow that paradigm, but it's not cheaper and it doesn't always work. So it's not like the best option that we have. So it's not always, I mean, anything digital costs as much money, if not more, as anything. The problem is shrinking space, I think, and environmental change that destroys things, or rather material change, not necessarily, but the environment can cause problems. And I saw that Mats Lindström, our deputy director, was here. He had a very interesting project for his thesis. He wrote on microfilm, and that is an example of sort of early storage that never really took through. Because it sounded like a great idea, but it also did take storage, and it did take special machinery to be operated, and we don't use that anymore. And now John wrote a question. I'm not sure, but I would say that what I tell people when they want to digitize is like, you want to digitize. Digitizing is one thing. That's converting things from sort of analog to digital. Then there is born digital things, which are already made digital from the start. And then you have digitalization, which is taking those digital things and making them searchable, findable, accessible, reusable. And that's what you do afterwards. And these are three different things, but I would say none of them becomes cheap. So taking a picture might sound like a cheaper idea these days. And also technologies change, right? I mean, you talk about a floppy disk. I had my master's thesis in a floppy disk, and I had to buy a floppy disk reader. And that was expensive and difficult to find. And the floppies sort of break. And I have a whole collection of floppy disk with pictures from my sort of 20s somewhere in Greece, in my house. But yeah. Can you read them? Does it make sense? And some of them, things break there too in the digital room. So I'm not sure, but it's always, the excuse is always preservation. And I personally review projects where digitization comes as an excuse for preservation. And I think that's very interesting, because that's not always the case. It doesn't preserve necessarily. Doesn't mean cheaper, doesn't mean easier. But John has another question here. I don't know if I answered your question, or if I should move on to John, or
move on to John. Absolutely.
So could you tell the prospects and problems of distant reading or distant reading and natural language analysis? It can be two different things, or it could be very similar. Distant reading is the process of sort of picking out things. I work with some of these things, and I work with sort of a little bit of distant reading in my Perigesis project. I mean, yeah, we do distant reading in Greek. So we have 10 volumes of a 2000-old tourist guide that we try to extract all of the place names, and sometimes with named entity recognition in a language other than English, but also in English, you have to go and review, because you may have Athens, Georgia, or you may have, Athens, Greece. And if it only says Athens, it could pick either of the two, and that you always need a human. You can't do things automatically 100%. And the same with automatic classification. Like, yeah, of course, that if that woman was classified as a bird and there was no reviewer to say, a human person to say, well, actually, no, that's not a bird, that's a person. Well, you could argue that birds are persons too, but that's not the point there. So yeah, you need a human. You need humans to review and sort of make sure that things work. You always need a human.
Thanks very much. We should wrap up soon. So there was one interesting thing that came. So when we started working with Anna's group, and we were trying to, work together to see how we could get this small version of a project going, hopefully with a view to getting a larger view. One of the basic things that came up was, we don't often receive visits from the philosophy department. So the Digital Humanities Centre is there based. It's a department with its own research and teaching resources, but also there as a resource also for the humanities faculty in general in the university, and lots of departments, particularly the literature department and the sociology department and the art history department, have like ongoing collaborations, and I think this was the first time people from philosophy had come in and said, so what about us?
The coolest people, I would say, that's of course.
But also that in a way you can see why that's the case, because there's a certain sense in which the kind of evidence one gets from natural language programming, for example, is evidence that there are certain kinds of things happening, or there's also things, but the philosophy that one tries to do with it is based on slightly different kinds of a notion of evidence, often just slightly different operations. So we're really grateful to be trying to find a way in which we can get these two areas to match.
I think philosophy is a very fascinating subject, and I think it would be very interesting to look at sort of natural language analysis project. And I'm looking forward to what you're getting. I wanted to come to more lectures, but it's been completely difficult this semester. We had a lot of things going on, but hopefully next round I will also show up and hear your incredibly interesting talks at the Templeton project. I'm sorry I've been a bit inactive, and if you are okay with me, I can also share it to our lists, because I think we need humanities inquiry, and I think philosophy deals with things in a much more qualitative way than any other discipline, and I think that's really good.
Excellent. Well, brilliant. And thank you so much for coming today and telling us all these things and showing us these amazing possibilities. So many, many thanks.
Thank you so much as well.
Thank you for watching this recorded seminar in the series The Prospect of Criticism, part of the Templeton-funded research project, Knowledge, Perception and the Prospects of Criticism. If you'd like to find out more about the project, to learn about upcoming events or watch other recordings in the seminar series, please go to our website www.knowledgeperceptioncriticism.com.